Welcome to the depths of Reddit, hosted by yours truly, DrDark. This series is a compilation of all my story narrations of the week. Do feel free to tune in every Sunday for a fresh episode to relax and chill to. With this, gather around, settle down, as the classes of DrDark are now in session. My town was in many regards like any other town, which had its own fair share of festivals and church gatherings. The only thing that set us apart from any other town was the curfew. Nobody was allowed outside after 12 am. At 11:30 the police would sweep the area, making sure everyone was inside. We weren't allowed back out until sunrise. We also were advised to never answer a knock at the door, no matter how desperate or human the entity on the other side seemed. Nobody in my town disobeyed this rule until tonight. Mr. and Mrs. T were new to the neighborhood, and we did give them the warning about the town curfew. They asked why, and we just told them that they can't be outside and had a police officer to enforce this rule. That very night, they moved in. We heard screaming and arguing coming from their house. It was around 11:58 p.m., and Mr. T did not acknowledge the warning and ran outside for a cigarette. The police had already done their scan of the town, and nobody would step outside to save him. The clock turned to 12, and the moon became obscured by dark clouds. I looked out the window from my bedroom. I could see a few houses doing the same. That's when the street lights went out. We heard panic, and only the light from the neighbors beeping out the windows enlightened the horrific scene. Shadows gathered around Mr. T, and we saw that looking like long shadowy arms reach up from the ground and coil around the unfortunate man. No, let me go, he shouted in vain, trying to get loose, but it was futile. That's when Mrs. T ran out to join him. Jerry, she screamed to the man who was already half submerged in the asphalt ground. Going outside to save her husband was the last mistake she should make, for when she did, the arms coiled around her too. No, please, help, someone help. She was muffled when one of the hands closed her mouth and dragged her down with her husband, who was already dead. That's when we heard it knocking at the door, followed by a voice. It sounded like Mr. T, but I knew better. Please, sir, let me in. It's very cold out here. Please, they will get me if you don't let me in just for a moment. We knew better than to answer knocks at the door when the shadows gathered. I tried to sleep but couldn't. I have not seen the shadows take people before, but it was hard to witness. We thought as long as we followed the curfew and stayed in our houses that we would be safe. We were so wrong. It was a week after the incident and the town was due for a lunar eclipse. I figured the light of the moon would be enough to dispel the darkness and save me from the boogeyman at night. Oh, I was so wrong. That night came and we went about our usual routine, locking the doors, windows, and drawing the curtains. While we were drawing the curtains, we noticed a thick fog began to set in. We didn't think much of it. I did panic a little when I looked at the calendar and saw that the date had read Friday the 13th. I was never a big buyer into unlucky 13, but something about this time made me uneasy. We were off to bed as the clock read 12 am. That's when a strong wind flew by. Things went from weird to terrifying and dangerous when the wind became so strong it shattered one of the windows. I was in awe and terror as I watched the curtains, which was our last defense against the windows, lift from the window current to reveal the darkness oozing into our house like a vapor cloud. My dad grabbed me and my mom grabbed my sister and rushed us to the upstairs bedroom. We could hear screams and panic through the harsh winds. This had never happened before. It couldn't invade our house. Was it stronger somehow? I just thought to myself. We rushed ourselves into mom and dad's giant closet and locked the door, taking a jacket and stuffing it under the door, trying to close off every entrance to the closet. My sister cried. My dad was shaking with fear. My mom trying to comfort both. And I just stood there, shocked. Mom had her phone so we could see the time. It was 12:10 am and we had a long night ahead of us, so we grabbed some clothes to make a pseudo bed and slept together the best we could. We woke up at some odd hours of the night to knocking on our closet. One voice pretending to be our neighbor, asking to take her child. Another was my best friend Tony. I covered my ears, knowing we were hearing the voices of the deceased. It was 6:12 a.m. when my dad looked out the closet to see if it was safe. The darkness was gone. The sky was a metallic grey and blue. We walked downstairs to see our living space covered in broken glasses and blown over ornaments. We walked outside to a hellscape, empty neighborhoods, with the exception of a few people who managed to somehow survive the night. Everyone in that town moved the same day. It's a ghost town now, and no one should ever visit it. Before I start this story, it's important for me to clarify that the paranormal here in the United States isn't seen the same as it is in Mexico, from where my father's from and from who I heard this story. Here, at least from my experience, it's seen as nothing more than a cool and sometimes taboo subject to be into, and sometimes people consider it to be a sort of hobby. In Mexico, on the other hand, it's seen from a much different point of view. It's a part of our culture. The same stories that our great-grandparents heard are the same ones that we are passed down to. La Llorona, Duendes, Nuales, Brujas, and even the devil himself. We are taught to treat these things with respect and to never take them lightly. To us, it's much more than just witnessing an old chair move on a blurry security cam, or maybe hearing footsteps in an empty room. It's just a part of our culture. My father is not the type of man to seek attention. He's a humble, honest, hard-working man, and as a result, I wholeheartedly believe him. Since he could remember, he had the misfortune of being more sensitive to the paranormal than most. What I mean by this is that all throughout his life, he has found himself face to face with most of the stories we are warned about. Even now, as a grown man, our entire family has grown accustomed to experiencing more than our fair share. It's almost as if this sort of stuff follows not only him around, but us too. This particular story takes place in Mexico when he was maybe 8 or 9 years old. He was accompanying his grandfather, who at the same time was working as a watchman at one of his friend's stores. This specific store also functioned as a warehouse, similar to stores like Costco or Sam's Club, but on a much smaller scale. Bodega Horrera, for those of you wondering. It was around 11 o'clock when they arrived, well past sunset and into the night. My great-grandfather and his friend had struck a deal, and wherever he was on his shifts, he would help himself to anything he wanted to eat, as long as he kept a list in order to make sure it wasn't marked down as stolen inventory. As they were getting ready for the night, my dad was told that he could choose anything he wanted to eat. My dad was excited to hear this, as it wasn't often that he was given the opportunity to choose anything from the store that wasn't a necessity without having to worry about having enough to pay for it. He wanted to make sure he made the most of this opportunity and decided to go around the store looking for what he wanted the most. He finally made up his mind and settled on a bottle of chocolate milk. He started to make his way around the store and eventually found himself wandering the halls in search of the refrigerator aisle. After figuring out it was in the very back of the store, he hurriedly rushed towards the low buzzing hum of the dozens of refrigerators there. After running past the aisles and suddenly turning onto the very last aisle, all he remembers was, quote unquote, an indescribable feeling of not only pure terror and true fear, but also an endless sense of despair. As he turned the corner, he was face to face with a tall, thin man. My father tells me this man had to have been at least 2 meters tall. His initial reaction was to try and run away from him, but he couldn't. It was more than being just paralyzed with fear. He felt an endless empty pit inside him as well as around him. He doesn't remember the face of that man, and he doesn't know how much time passed. He had lost his sense of where he was and at the time could not tell for the life of him anything except for the fact that it was him and the man in front of him. He does remember, however, that this man was neatly groomed and seemed very well kept. Despite not remembering his face, he does recall that he was staring straight at him. He does not remember what happened after, He only remembers coming to his senses on the floor in his grandfather's arms, being questioned about what had just happened. His face was full of tears. All he could manage to choke out was that the man was here, over and over. His grandfather's first thought was that someone had broken in, and he rushed my father back to the front of the store, where the only lockable room was located, the owner's office. He told my father to wait inside the office and that no matter what, to not open the door to anyone. He would be back as soon as he checked the store to make sure it was safe. But the memory of the man was still all too fresh in my father's mind, and he decided he'd rather brave running into the man again and his grandfather by his side rather than remain alone inside the store again. Despite his grandfather believing it wasn't safe, he could see the terror in my father's eyes and complied with my father's wishes. After checking through each and every corridor and deciding that the store was safe, they both headed back to the office, where my dad explained everything. For the most part, it seemed to be an isolated incident, as my great-grandfather later that morning told the owner what had happened, and he claimed it was the first he had heard of anything of the sort happening inside the store. It is worth noting, however, that the store was torn down not 2 months later after this incident, and the owner seemed to give no more of an explanation other than he was losing money. Despite my father not daring to outright say what he thinks he saw that night, it's more than apparent to me that based on his description of both the man and the feelings that overcame him, I think it's safe to assume that the man he saw was none other than El Diablo, the devil. The demolition of the store does nothing but further fuel the theory as to what it was my father saw that night. I can tell it is midnight, not by the pitch black of the night sky, not by the tiny clock at my bedside table, but by the sounds of the monster coming towards my bedroom. I don't know why it likes to approach quietly, since I always know when it is coming. We both know I always know when it is coming. I lay curled up on my side, hugging my pillow, feeling myself sweat and hearing my breathing speed up. It's coming closer. I can hear it. I can feel it. You know, I saw it earlier today. I saw the way it looked at me, like it wanted to just devour me later. I felt fear run through my veins, being scared of this monster. It's not like being scared of vicious dogs or ghosts. It's a different kind of fear, the kind that freezes your insides, makes you think you could run on hot coals just to get away from it. The kind that never leaves your mind, even when it is daylight and the monster is nowhere near you. Now, as I lie alone in my bed, I hear the monster approaching. I hear a loud thud, and I think to myself, what was that? I am too scared to sit up and take a look. Besides, whether I look at it or not will make no difference. The monster will still hurt me. But that sound, it sounded as if something had dropped on my bedroom floor. No, it sounded as if something had come through my window. Something had jumped into my bedroom through the window. The monster is getting smarter, I realize. It doesn't have to creep past my mother's bedroom to get me now. Somehow it could climb up and into my room. Then I hear it. The monster is moving across my window, from my window to my bed. It is slithering? Slithering. This is new. The monster never slithers. Walks, yes. Crawls, sometimes. But slither, never. I still lay with my eyes firmly closed, trying my best to look as if I'm in deep sleep. Then suddenly, so sudden my heart skipped a beat, I heard the monster dive under my bed. I dared not move. I lay frozen. My breathing now seemed to be the loudest thing in the room. No, scratch that. The loudest thing in the world. I wanted to scream, but I know that would be of no use. The monster would get to me before I open my mouth. It's done it before. It's deathly quiet. It is under my bed, silent. I felt like I could die of fear. Why is it playing with me now? Why couldn't it just get it over with? I can't bear the suspense. It's a different form of torture. Then suddenly I hear it moving. It is getting up now. I hear the noises it makes against the floorboards as it gets up. Then I feel my bed moving. The wretched thing is on my bed. It puts itself on my bed. Slowly I can feel it getting closer. My hands are shaking like leaves. My heart feels like it will burst out of my chest. The hairs on the back of my neck stand like icicles. It moves until I can feel it leaning over me. I can tell by the way it positioned itself and by its cold as ice breath on my face. "Open your eyes," it commanded. Startled, I opened my eyes and turned towards it. When I saw the monster, my mouth dropped open. Its skin was so black I couldn't make it out properly. The things that stood out were its eyes and mouth. Its eyes were a dark, piercing green. Its mouth hung open, and it seemed as if a fire was burning in its throat the way its mouth was lit up, a pulsating mixture of orange and red. Horns that looked as sharp as knives stuck out of the top of what I could make out as its head. It was huge. It towered over me. I felt suffocated just by how huge it was and how close it was to me. I calmed down quickly because I wasn't scared. In fact, I was confused. This wasn't my monster. This was a new monster. My confusion pushed aside some of my fear, and I found my voice. Who are you? If you have come to hurt me, please don't. I haven't done anything wrong." This new monster moved back slightly. It's hard to tell, but I think I confused it. "What? Someone like me comes into your room and you automatically assume I'm here to hurt you? That's hurtful," it said. "Nope, I've insulted it." "No, sorry. I mean, what do you want from me? And by the way, you can't blame me for assuming you're here to hurt me. It's not as if you came during broad daylight and knocked politely on my door." The monster held a gigantic claw on what I assumed was his cheek and contemplated this. "You have a point there. Yeah, sorry for the theatrics. I had to make sure you were alone before the real monster came," he said. I froze. "What time is it?" I whispered. The thing above me turned its head and glanced at my clock. 11:59 p.m., it said. "Why? Does the monster normally come at an appointed time?" It comes at midnight, and it hurts me, this monster," I said, feeling tears forming in my eyes. "You asked me why I am here?" This new monster said softly. "I am not here to hurt you. I am here to protect you. Your monster will never hurt you again, I promise." It laid one of its huge claws on my shoulder and patted me comfortingly. It felt like getting caressed with a brick. But I felt relief at its words, too relieved for words myself. I looked up at the clock. "Midnight," I whispered, feeling fear creep in at thought of the real monster to come. "The monster is coming." The new monster, this monster with no sense of personal space, got up from the bed and slithered over to the door. He stood next to it, ready to attack when the monster entered. I braced myself. We both became deathly still. Then we hear it. The monster, coming towards my door, coming quietly. I held my breath. I heard the knob turning. I glanced at my monster friend by the door. He held one claw up above him, ready to strike. Slowly, with a slow creak, the door opened, and Dad crept into the room. Your attendance has been recorded. Make sure to follow me on social media on your way out. Have your own stories? Submit them on my subreddit. Tune into my stories anytime and anywhere by listening to my podcast. The links to everything is in the description below. Until next time, class dismissed.